Like the ETCO2 tracing we are seeing here, I would call it a normal tracing for a patient who is on mechanical ventilation. Why do we call it normal? Like in yesterday's session, we saw about how to read a ECG. There was a systematic approach we follow, like we see the rate, rhythm, the P wave, PR interval, QRS, and so many components which we discussed yesterday. Likewise, for ETCO2 tracing also, we have to look at certain components. We call it a normal trace based on its size, the shape, the frequency, rhythm, and the baseline. By size, we mean the height of the capnograph trace. So here what we see is the capnograph is showing a reading of around 37 millimeter mercury. Anywhere between 32 to 40 is normal for a patient who is on mechanical ventilation. The shape we see here is a normal shape. I'll discuss more about the shape in the subsequent slide. Frequency in a mechanically ventilated patient is what we are setting on the ventilator. The rhythm should be regular in a passage and it should be of an equal amplitude. And the baseline should touch zero. The baseline here should touch zero. When all these are met, we call it a normal capnogram. So in a ETCO2 tracing, there is one segment which is the expiratory segment, and there's another that is the inspiratory segment. In the expiratory segment, it has 3 to 4 phases, and phase 0 is the inspiratory phase. So in phase 1, that is the beginning of expiration, as we begin to expire, the gases that initially come out are from the anatomical dead space that has not participated in exchange of carbon dioxide or gases. And so this segment will read 0, that is the baseline there. And as we continue to exhale, there's some amount of mixing of the alveolar gas with that of the anatomical dead space. And we see a upstroke, that is phase 2. In phase 3, basically what air is coming out is from the alveoli, which is rich in carbon dioxide. This is the plateau phase. The end of phase 3, the carbon dioxide value here is what is taken as the PETCO2 value. In COPD patients, there can be an additional phase 4 where we see a sudden rise in carbon dioxide concentration. And as we begin to inhale, the carbon dioxide content in inspired air is 0. So there is a rapid downstroke followed by a baseline where there is no carbon dioxide. So, and we have to remember that the baseline is contributed both by the inspiratory as well as the expiratory segment. Now, there are two angles here. One is alpha angle and the beta angle. The alpha angle is between the phase 2, the rapid upstroke, and the plateau phase. The angle that forms here is the alpha angle. The normal alpha angle is 100 to 110 degrees. And between phase 3 and the inspiratory phase 0, the angle we see here is the beta angle, and this is 90 degrees. There's a slight upstroke of phase 3. This is because of the physiological ventilation and perfusion mismatch that is there. So the normal ETCO2 is 35 to 40 millimeter mercury. So now, if we see this trace after we have intubated the patient, we are quite happy because it's normal. That indicates that the tube is in the trachea. On the other hand, if after intubation we get a tracing like this, we won't call it normal because it has not reached an adequate size. It's just around 10 or 15, and the amplitude is not maintained. There's a constantly decreasing amplitude followed by 3 to 5 waves. After that, it disappears. So this is typical of an esophageal intubation. Now, ASA standard requires that the correct positioning of endotracheal tube is confirmed by identification of carbon dioxide in expired air. And this has to continue throughout general anesthesia. So we can confirm tracheal placement of tube by looking at the waveforms. We should at least get 3 equal height waveforms, then we can confirm it is an endotracheal intubation. So the normal ETCO2 is 35 to 40. What we are measuring is actually the alveolar gas concentration of carbon dioxide. But what is present in arterial blood is slightly higher. The normal PaCO2 is 35 to 45 millimeter mercury. The difference between these two, that is arterial and the end tidal concentration, the gradient is around 2 to 5 millimeter mercury, and this is because of the alveolar dead space. Under anesthesia, it can increase to 5 to 10 millimeter mercury because there's some amount of a decrease in cardiac output with induction of anesthesia. So now normal capnogram not only tells that it is a normal tracheal intubation, but several aspects of physiology is normal. That is what a normal capnogram actually tells to us. From where does this carbon dioxide in expired air come from? Carbon dioxide is produced at the level of the cells by cellular metabolism. It is transported by circulation to the alveoli. At the level of alveoli, carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli, from which it is finally eliminated during expiration. And what we are monitoring here is what is the carbon dioxide in the expired air. So a normal carbon dioxide in exhaled air means that the metabolism, circulation, respiration, and the equipment that we are using for measurement, all of this are normal. When a patient is under general anesthesia, there's yet another component that gets added, that is the breathing circuit and what are the ventilator parameters we are setting. So normal capnogram means that all these components are normal, but when it is abnormal, that is when we have to analyze what is the cause for the abnormality. Is it at the level of metabolism, or is it at the level of circulation, or at the level of ventilation, or is it related to the equipment, either the breathing circuit we are using or the measuring equipment we are using. So there can be certain conditions in which this gradient between the arterial and end tidal concentration increases. It can happen in case of lung pathologies, like if we have an alveoli which is not adequately ventilated, then the pulmonary blood flow that is crossing these alveoli may not be able to release carbon dioxide into the alveoli, and this gets added to the oxygenated blood or the blood that has released carbon dioxide. And in another situation, if there is a pulmonary embolus, is happening but blood flow is not happening, so adequate exchange of gases has not occurred. In these two conditions, there can be an increase in arterial and end tidal carbon dioxide gradient. And there are very few situations in which the end tidal carbon dioxide is actually greater than the arterial carbon dioxide concentration. And this mostly it is asked in quiz. Practically, we don't see it because we are not measuring in all cases the arterial carbon dioxide. So it can happen when the FRC is decreased, like in pregnancy or in a morbid obesity patient, or in cases where there is significant rebreathing. So now I'll go through some of the common waveforms that can occur during mechanical ventilation and how do we analyze this. I'll be following the same approach as looking at the size, the shape, the frequency, the rhythm, and the baseline. So once we approach like this, we can make sure that we are not missing any of the components and even the minute details we are picking up from the trace. So here, what do we see? We see that the baseline is at 0. There's a steep upstroke. That is phase 2 is okay. The plateau phase is okay. Followed by a downstroke during inspiration. The alpha angle, beta angle all appear normal. But the size, when we look at the size, it's only around 20 millimeter mercury. So what is the most common cause for this trace in a patient who's on mechanical ventilation? We should first consider it is probably we have hyperventilating the patient. We have to look at the tidal volume and the respiratory rate. But if the ventilatory parameters are okay and still this thing is there, then we have to look at other causes like what we said, the metabolism, the circulation, equipment related. What could be the other causes? That could be either a decrease in metabolism, it can be due to hypothermia. There could be a fall in blood pressure. There could be a fall in circulation that is causing decreased transport of carbon dioxide to the lungs. All this could result in a capnogram, which we see. So this is the next trace. Again, the baseline is okay, upstroke is okay, the plateau phase and the downstroke all appear normal. But the size, the height of the trace is small. It's around 50. That means the most common causes we have to again look at whether we are hypoventilating the patient. And if hypoventilation is not there, we have to look at other causes related to metabolism. Is there an increased carbon dioxide production? Is a hypothermia? and all other causes of increased carbon dioxide production like sepsis or shivering, and all these causes we have to look into. The next capnograph trace here, again the baseline is 0, upstroke, plateau, and downstroke are okay. But in the plateau phase, we see a dip. That is, it indicates that during the expiratory phase, the patient is trying to inspire. And this is called a curate left. The patient is probably coming out of muscle relaxant. You may have to top up the muscle relaxant. And in this trace, yes, the baseline upstroke and early part of plateau phase is okay, but in the later half or the last 25% of the plateau phase, we see some to and fro movements. These are, it's not pathological. These are called cardiogenic oscillations. This mostly we observe when the respiratory rate is low, and it is caused by the mechanical movement of heart, that is a contraction and relaxation activity of the heart that is getting transmitted to the alveoli that are abutting the heart, causing a slight to and fro movement of air into and out of the alveoli. This is not pathological, it is a physiological waveform only. And in this case, yes, the baseline is okay, is also okay, but it has not reached the normal height. The plateau phase, at the end of the plateau phase, we suddenly see a spike and then there's a downstroke. This is commonly seen when there is a leak in the sampling line. The EtCO2 value that we read may be normal because it is measuring at the end of the plateau phase. Why does this happen is because during the early phase, in a side stream monitor, a pump actually aspirates air for analysis. So if there's a leak in the sampling line, during initial phases, what happens is there's a lot of entrainment of ambient air, which dilutes the carbon dioxide. As the circuit pressure builds up, then whatever the ambient air entrainment comes down and we get a normal reading. Now this is another interesting capnogram. This is what we see when we are using a Bain circuit. So here the baseline is not touch 0. The upstroke is okay. The plateau phase is okay. There's a downstroke. But during the later part of inspiration, what we see is we see a hump like this. This is a signature capnogram that is seen when we use Bain circuit. So why does this happen when we use a Bain circuit? For this, we have to look at the functional analysis of how a movement of gas that occurs when we are using Bain circuit for controlled ventilation. So here, during the expiratory pause, what happens is, whatever the gases that have expired, they have gone into the outer tube of a Bain circuit, and the fresh gas flow is also happening, which is pushing these gases towards the expiratory valve. A majority of the gases is lost. The alveolar gases gets pushed out through the expiratory valve, but a small portion of the alveolar gas can remain there. And during the next inspiration, that this is the amount of alveolar gas that remains there. During inspiration, what happens is during the initial portion, the air that goes in is basically the fresh gas, which is not having any carbon dioxide in it. But during the later phases of inspiration, some amount of alveolar gas can enter. And that is what is producing a hump in the later portion of the inspiration. And we know open circuits, they are not non-rebreathing circuits. We have the washout of carbon dioxide depends on how we are ventilating and the fresh gas flow we are using. So ideal in a Bain circuit is to use, how we can avoid rebreathing is we have to use a fresh gas flow of 70 to 100 ml per kg per minute, tidal volume 10 ml per kg, and a respiratory rate of 12 to 14. Now, is this the only fresh gas flow and minute ventilation we have to use? So such isopleth graphs are available. This is what I've taken from Dosh and Dosh. We can use a variety of combination of fresh gas flow and minute ventilation to maintain the PaCO2 at a normal range. So if you're using around 120 ml per minute of minute ventilation, and we can use a fresh gas flow of around 90 ml per kg per minute to maintain EtCO2 around 38. This is how we're going to use this graph. Now the next is, in this trace, we see the baseline is 0. Upstroke, however, is not rapid. It is prolonged. There is no plateau phase. The alpha angle has increased. And here the patient has started to inspire. This is okay. And this capnogram resembles a shark fin, and it is called a shark fin capnogram. What is basically happening is the exhalation, the expiratory phase is getting prolonged because of some obstruction. The alveolar gases are not just coming out as quickly as they should. So this is typical of increased airway resistance. The increased airway resistance could occur either because of patient is having COPD, or because there's bronchospasm, or there's endotracheal tube kinking, or it is because of endobronchial intubation. Most often, it's due to COPD or bronchospasm that has occurred. And once we give bronchodilators, we see the response that it will settle. The shark fin pattern will settle. So in this case, the EtCO2 will not provide adequate indication of what is the PaCO2. That is, the gradient between PaCO2 and EtCO2 would have increased. So in this capnogram trace, what we are saying is the baseline has touched zero, but not for the entire duration that it should actually. The upstroke is okay. The plateau phase is also fine, but it is slightly prolonged. This is where the inspiration should have actually started. But we see that some carbon dioxide is there even during the early phase of inspiration, and the downstroke is slurred. There's a slurred downstroke, thereby increasing the beta angle. This is typical of an incompetent inspiratory valve. So ideally, the valve should have closed at this point and the inspiration should have started here, resulting in a deep downstroke. But because the valve has been incompetent, some amount of expired air rich in carbon dioxide has entered the inspirator limb, and it is being pushed in again during the next breath. The capnogram we see now down here is the baseline has not touched zero. The baseline has not touched zero. The upstroke is rapid. The plateau phase appears slightly prolonged. Inspiratory phase is okay. This capnogram is typical of there's a rebreathing pattern, and it is typical of an incompetent expiratory unidirectional valve. The incompetent expiratory unidirectional valve has resulted in rebreathing of expired gases, which is rich in carbon dioxide. Now in this trace, what we see is that there's an exponential fall in carbon dioxide concentration. We have to act immediately. The cause could be a massive pulmonary embolism, or there could be a cardiac arrest, or it can be indicative of a sudden loss resulting in significant pulmonary hyperperfusion. This is the next trace. What we see here is there's a sudden fall in EtCO2. The cause could be a circuit disconnection or a sudden cardiac arrest. In these two situations, we have to act immediately, and these are very alarming situations. Then a few words on the EtCO2 trace during cardiopulmonary resuscitation. If you see such a trace during cardiopulmonary resuscitation, the EtCO2 is less than 10. It means that the chest compression is inadequate. There's probably a rescue of fatigue. It is time to change over. Ideal is to have a EtCO2 above 15. That indicates that coronary perfusion is also adequate. During CPR, if we see an abrupt increase in EtCO2, something like this, that it means, yes, we have attained our endpoint, ROSC is attained, we are happy. Then coming to a few terminologies which the examiner may be interested in: what is capnography, what is capnograph, what is capnogram, and capnometry. Capnography is a continuous monitoring and the graphic display of carbon dioxide concentration in respired gas. The device that generates the carbon dioxide waveform is the capnograph. The waveform as such is the capnogram. And what do we mean by capnometry? Capnometry is measurement and numeric display of carbon dioxide concentration without a continuous waveform. That means in capnometry, we just get a number, while in capnography, we can have a real-time monitoring of each and every breath. via graph. So now whether capnometry is good or capnography, is the number enough or do we need to have a graph? So by capnometry, we can just know whether the value is high, whether it is normal or whether it is low. The advantage of capnography is by the size of the trace, we can definitely know the number. Apart from that, from the shape, the frequency, rhythm, and baseline, we can just get some clues as to what is the cause of this alteration in the number. So we can identify why it is high or low. Is it related to ventilation? Is it related to equipment? And is it related to metabolism and circulation? We can get a clue if we are viewing at the capnography trace along with the like temperature and the blood pressure, the other vital signs. And a few points on the principles of capnography. Basically, the capnography principles, these are the 4 principles that are involved in capnography. That one is Raman scattering, photoacoustic measurement, mass spectrometry, and infrared absorption spectrometry. What we frequently use in our theater is infrared absorption spectrometry. It is based on the principle that an asymmetric polyatomic gas absorbs infrared light at a specific wavelength, and carbon dioxide absorbs infrared light at 4.3 micrometers. At this wavelength, there's minimum interference from other polyatomic gases like nitrous oxide present in expired air. The amount of carbon dioxide absorbed depends, the amount of infrared rays that is absorbed depends on the carbon dioxide molecule that is present. So this is the Beer-Lambert's law. If there are more carbon dioxide molecules, more infrared absorption and less amount of transmission happens. If there are less amount of carbon dioxide molecules, more of this infrared light is actually transmitted. There's less absorption. Based on this, these values are compared to the infrared light that is absorbed with a chamber that is free of carbon dioxide, and a value is displayed. Now coming to the type of capnographs, there are 2 types of capnographs. One is the side stream analyzer and mainstream analyzers. Whatever the type of capnograph we are using, it is important where we place, where is the sampling actually done. It should be done as close to the endotracheal tube, as close to the patient, and the ideal point is immediately next to the endotracheal tube. Now both of these actually work on the same infrared absorption principle only. In side stream analyzers, we are continuously aspirating a portion of the expired air, which is analyzed at a site that is away from the breathing circle. The aspiration rate is from 50 to 250 ml per minute, and the disadvantage of this is that that there's some time that is taken for response. There's a lag time. And these tubings are around like 6 feet tall. They should not be absorbing any carbon. The tubing material should not absorb carbon dioxide. So they are made of Teflon. Water vapor can clog the tubes. Therefore, there should be a water trap for collecting the water vapor. The advantage is it's lightweight. And the problem with mainstream analyzer, that is the heating that I'll tell later, it's not there with the side stream analyzers. Now the mainstream analyzer, the carbon dioxide sensor, the infrared source, and the detector, all of these are just in close proximity to the endotracheal tube. The problem here is that the mucus and any mucus that is in saliva can contaminate these sensors. Water vapor can contaminate. Therefore, these are heated to around 40 degrees. The presence of a heavy heated equipment near the face of the patient, sometimes it can result in burns if it is in constant contact with the patient's skin. The advantage, however, is that the mainstream analyzers, there's no lag time. The response is quick. Coming to the types of capnogram, what we have seen so far is the time capnogram. That is, we are plotting carbon dioxide against time. That is, what is the volume of carbon dioxide at each point of time being exhaled. In volume capnogram, the expired carbon dioxide is plotted against the total expired volume. The advantage of volume capnogram is that we can calculate the anatomical dead space and the alveolar dead space by using a volume capnogram. The disadvantage is that it is cumbersome and we need a spirometer for doing this. So by providing a breath-to-breath real-time monitoring of ventilation, carbon dioxide monitoring detects events long before the pulse oximeter and vital signs monitoring show that there's a problem. For example, consider there has been a disconnection. By the time desaturation has occurred, it's already late. But when we are monitoring the ETCO2 curve, graph, that is the waveform, and there's an abrupt stop in the waveform, that means we are getting alert and we're going to look into what is the cause of this one. Carbon dioxide along with oxygen monitoring can prevent 93% of avoidable anesthetic missions. To recap what we have said, what are the causes of an increased EtCO2 concentration? It can happen like what we have seen, the metabolism, circulation and ventilation, as well as the equipment related problems. Increased carbon dioxide production can result due to an increase in metabolic rate if there are sepsis as a result of malignant hypothermia, the patient is having seizure or sugaring, and in case of hypothyroidism. Increase can also occur when there is a decrease in carbon dioxide elimination, like if we are actually hypoventilating the patient, or there is a certain amount of rebreathing that is happening because either of carbon dioxide absorbed by exhaustion, or there is an unidirectional valve dysfunction, either the inspiratory or expiratory unidirectional valve. Or it can be merely an artifact with the measuring system we are using. A decrease in carbon dioxide EtCO2 can result because of a decrease in carbon dioxide production, such as a decrease in BMR, hypothermia, or hypothyroidism. Increase in carbon dioxide elimination can occur when we are hyperventilating the patient. It can occur due to decrease in carbon dioxide delivery to the alveoli. Such can occur as in hypoperfusion or pulmonary embolism, or due to artifact problem with the measuring system, or it can occur if the gas sampling tube, there is a leak or there's a loose connection. Even a leak, endotracheal cuff leak, means some amount of expired air is going out because of the leak. So all the exhaled gas is not coming out through the endotracheal tube. So there can be a false low EtCO2 value that is being displayed. In cases of perfusion and pulmonary embolism, we have to look at the arterial concentration also, and here we can identify the gradient between the arterial and end tidal carbon dioxide concentration is increased. Now to summarize, what we have seen today is how to have a systematic approach to read a capnogram and what are the uses of capnography. Here we have stressed that it is not only useful in identifying a correct endotracheal intubation, but also provides a lot of insight into what is the physiology that is happening in the patient. And we have looked at some of the commonly encountered capnograms during mechanical ventilation. And in brief, we have looked at the principles of capnography, the types of capnography, and the types of capnogram. Thank you for your patient listening, and all the very best for exams.
Shivra, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
It was fantastically presented. I mean, after a long time, I could hear one beautiful lecture. Nowadays, you're not attending the CAV's conferences and all those stuff. Whatever I've attended in the recent time, this was one of the best lecture I heard. Very nicely presented. Very, it is not only for practical purpose, like Viva was. It was also useful for writing the theories and other stuff. It was commendable, no doubt. There are few doubts which people have posted in the chat group.
Yes, sir. Will I be able to see the chat? I'm not sure. More.
I'll tell you. I'll ask you the questions.
Yes, sir. Sure.
A person has asked about. So many are coming suddenly. Thanking you, and all.
They've asked how to differentiate between leak in the sample line and pigtail capnogram.
Leak in sample line and
pigtail capnogram.
What does that pigtail mean actually? The pigtail capnogram means?
Yeah, there's something called
side stream.
pigtail capnogram. That actually happens. I'm not sure what it is, but that happens with neonates when there is a there will be a
Okay.
I'm not sure. I have no idea.
Okay,
This
what
pigtail.
happens in neonates is actually when if you are sampling the volume that is being sampled is greater than what is going to the child, then what the child is actually expiring out, what is coming out, then what can happen is there is a lot of entrainment of the fresh gas. So the capnogram, what is displayed, and the EtCO2 value is actually going to be less because there's a lot of entrainment of fresh gas.
Pigtail capnogram will look exactly like the leak in the sample line, but there will be a dip just before the last part of the. There will be a bump in the last part of the capnogram, right? In leak in the capnogram sample line.
Yeah, yeah.
But in pigtail capnogram, there will be a small dip before that. That is probably because of the entrainment. Even I'm not sure what it is. This
Probably
is
we'll find out and post it in the
yeah,
ISA
we'll
group.
probably post it.
Yeah.
I have heard
Or
about it somewhere.
if,
Sripra, can you go through
yeah.
those doubts and can you answer them in the chat box itself so that we can continue with our next presentation if it is okay with you?
Yeah, okay. There's one they have asked about what is the difference between phase 0 and phase 4.
Ah,
Phase 0 is the inspiratory part where there's a steep down slope. Phase 4 is seen only in COPD patients when there's going to be an upstroke at the end of the plateau phase. So that is phase 0. Only I'll type the other
yes,
answers in
yes,
the chat box.
that will be better so
Sure,
that
sir.
we can continue with the next session because it should not.
Yes, sir. If there is time, probably they could.
Yes, at the end of session, if you have to
Yeah.
clarify certain doubts direct, then we can come back.
There is one thing they've asked about repeating about cardiogenic oscillation.
Mhm.
Shall I tell that?
Yeah,
That one.
yeah.
So in cardiogenic oscillation, what is actually happening is the heart is contracting and relaxing. And whatever the alveoli that are adjacent to the heart, because these movements are getting to that alveoli, and there's a slight to and fro movement of air into and out of the alveoli. This we can see when the respiratory rate is very uh, respiratory rate is low, and it occurs at the end of expiration when the flow is actually zero. So this is what is a cardiogenic oscillation. It's not a pathological one; it is physiological.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sri,
Yeah, yeah.
so much.
Okay,
We will come
thank you,
back to
sir.
at the end. If you have to
Yes,
clarify certain notes, please come back and do that. Okay.
I'll be here only, sir. Not an
Tasha,
issue.
that's great.
Shall I
Thank you so
stop
much.
my screen share?
Yeah,
Yes,
you
Shall I
yes,
can
stop?
yes,
you can
yes,
stop that.
yes, yes. Okay. Okay then. Then we will go to the next one. That is the equipment part. Probably, I think one of the toughest one. Naglakshmi, can unmute
Yeah,
Suresh.
yes. Sir is on.
Suresh, you can hear me, Suresh?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm
Yeah.
able.
So this is one of the toughest one to deal with. We know the equipments, but there are certain things which we always miss. And in the examinations, the examiner catch hold of those points. To clarify that out, I didn't find anybody better than Suresh to explain this. He is an expert in all these things. He's one of the very good academician in our ISA Pondicherry, very good friend of ours. So he has taken effort to bring all the instrument and to present it to us so that all the students can present it in exam without any hitch. So without much delay, I will hand over it to Suresh. Please go ahead with your presentation, sir.
Thank you, sir. My audio is clear, sir.
Yes, yes, yes. Good, good, Suresh.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your introduction and ISA Puducherry. You're doing a good, wonderful job for exam going postgraduate, sir. And I think good evening, my friends and beloved postgraduates. I think you guys are lucky enough to have online Viva session one by one. I think the last session, as told, we have equipments now. Lucky enough to have you guys from attending from home, and I have compiled. See, there's 1 hour of time. As you know that we can't cover all the instruments. Okay. I think, ma'am, I can make my screen.
We can ask all the participants to do a speaker view, to have a speaker view so that only your picture will be coming on the screen.
Yeah, okay, ma'am. Fine.
That they can do by themselves. There is a option
Yeah,
in
okay,
the
ma'am.
right top corner. You can
Yeah,
go to the speaker view.
so I have a start my session. This 1 hour. I'll be actually doing a fast tracking of all the equipments because, as you all know, that this 1 hour time we can't cover all the equipments what we have in our field, like our subject being a vast subject, no single one textbook, a lot of things. So I'm not going to cover the entire Dash and Dash instruments, and also we can't not possible to cover an entire museum. So just exam point of view, what you guys will be commonly asked, just the equipments kept before you on the table. Okay. Usually remember that examiners have a choice of that, giving two instruments by themselves. They'll ask, give choice to you to pick up by yourself. So the funny thing is, you can take the bit tougher one first, so that they'll be happy examiners. Small tips, they will feel happy to answer the tougher one first, so that they will give the easy one, so you can answer very well and you can satisfy them. Okay. So I'm starting my session. First, I start about conventional tracheal tubes first. The first one being a red rubber tube. Okay, much of historical use, not used by nowadays. These are advantages being clean, sterilized, and reused multiple times. The disadvantage being it is not at all transparent, it's harder and becomes sticky with repeated usage and age. Poor resistance to kinking and becomes clogged by dried secretions and do not soften, and latex being a rubber, latex allergy is always possible. Nowadays become absolute only for historical use. So next comes your our traditional Murphy's endotracheal tube. So you all know that this is our bread and butter of our day-to-day practice. Coming on to general anesthesia, the GAs are used by our conventional Murphy's endotracheal tube. They're made of both PVC and silicon. PVC most widely used commonly. Silicon bit more expensive, but sterilized can be reused multiple times. And coming on to the parts, they have circular external and the internal walls. The machine end, this is the connector, universal connector, and this is the end you can shorten your tube as per the individual case basis. And you have the patient end. You can see the slanted portion called the bevel, and this is the acute angle of bevel formed between the bevel and the longitudinal axis of the tube. And the bevel usually faces left because majority you intubate the patient only from the right corner of mouth. So to avoid trauma for the occult cord, its bevel is usually faces the left. And there is a hole. You can see that there is a hole on the through the tube wall opposite to the bevels called the Murphy's eye. The advantage of Murphy's eye being it provides an alternate pathway for gas flow, reduces the trauma during nasal intubation, and disadvantage being forceps or tube exchangers or fiber optic scope can get entangled and get caught. So you should be cautious, and sometimes huge secretions can accumulate. And coming on to the tube length and the markings, it's been written oral and nasal, tube size in internal diameter in millimeters. The French scale size usually the 3 times the outer diameter of the tube, usually marked for sizes less than 6. And we have graduated markings 1 centimeter apart, just to allow the depth of insertion to be monitored and determine the exact length of your fixation. And it becomes single use or disposable we mentioned. And we have a radio opaque marker on the exact along the full length of the tube to have a post-op. I mean, any patient, critically ill patients are where you need to find the position of a tube in place. And this is the radius of curvature of the tube. And coming on to the inflation system, we have that pilot balloon, self-inflatable valve, inflation tube, and inflation lumen with the cuff. Coming on to cuff, we have two types, as you all know that it's low volume, high pressure cuff. The next is the high volume and low pressure cuff, which is more commonly used in, nowadays coming with the high volume and low pressure. The advantage of low volume, high pressure cuff being better protection against aspiration, better visibility during intubation, the lower incidence of sore throat. But the disadvantage being it causes more ischemic damage to the tracheal mucosa because of the high pressure. So coming on to high volume, what we have now, high volume, low pressure cuff. Advantages are being intracuff pressure closely approximates the pressure on the tracheal wall, so less incidence of ischemia, and possible to measure and regulate the pressure exerted on the tracheal mucosa, and cuff-induced complications are reduced. But the disadvantage is being a bit more difficult if it doesn't deflate it fully, and dislodgement of the tracheal tube with this type of cuff is possible, but higher incidence of sore throat. So we can go for other measures like topical lignocaine or other measures as of now, and not effectively prevent fluid leaking into the lower airway even at cuff pressures as high as 60 cm of water. Coming on to the sizes, as you know that females 7.5, male 8.5. For the cuff tubes in children, formula being age in years by 4 plus 3. For uncuffed tube based on years below 6 and above 6. Below 6, age in years by 3 plus 3.5. For above 6, age in years by 4 plus 4.5 be the common formula. So that's all about our conventional Murphy's tube. The same thing without Murphy, it's called Miller's tube, and this is uncuffed tube. Majority we have cuff and uncuffed tube. Nothing to show that. Next, we'll move on to ring Adair LV, the Ray tube. As you all know, that's named after the inventors Ring, Adair, and Elvin. We have oral and nasal preformed tubes. So this is the south pole or oral ray, and you can see this is the north pole. After intubation, I think I am clear. After intubation will be positioned like this. This is north pole or nasal ray. This is the south pole or oral ray. Ray tubes are designed with the intention to facilitate intraoral and facial surgeries especially, and the distinguishing feature is a preformed bend. That's an advantage here. It reduces the kinking and obstruction here, and always a black, you can see black marker bar is imprinted on the tube, the point of maximum angle of bend. And the indications being the south pole for cleft lip, cleft palate surgeries and nasal surgeries, and the north pole being for usually facial-maxillary, mandibular, or dental surgeries. North pole will be used because we can keep the circuit towards the head end. And here we'll go to the chest side of the circuit. We can fix on the chest side. The advantages: see that easy to secure and reduce the risk of accidental extubation, and the curve of the tube helps to place a circuit away from the surgical field. As I told you, the long length may make them useful for insertion through a supraglottic airway device. Also can able to intubate, and nasal tube may be useful for oral intubation of patients who are in the prone position. You can use this nasal ray. But the disadvantages with these tubes are, since the depth of insertion is very much predetermined by the tube's preformed shape, so well built or taller individuals, it can have any inadequate length if it doesn't choose a correct size, and difficult to achieve a good tube fit together with the correct insertion depth, which avoids accidental bronchial intubation going too much in or too much coming out, or cuff placement between the occult cuffs. In other disadvantage being in RA tubes, there occurs difficulty in passing the suction catheter intratracheally. You can't thread a catheter intra suddenly. Okay, so these are the disadvantages about RA tube. Fine. Now we'll move on to fluxometallic tube. As you all know that, so many names for that: reinforced tube, spiral embedded tube. There are so many names that we can go through later. And the parts being it has a metal or nylon spiral wound reinforcing wire covered internally and externally, either by rubbers, PVC, or silicone. So you can see the spiral end starts from here and end just beyond the cuff, not up to the end. See that it's not extend up to the machine end and the tracheal end. Useful in situations where the tube is likely to be bent or compressed in head and neck surgeries. Okay, there are many indications there. Advantages: resistance to kinking and compression. You can see that, and the portion of the tube outside the patient can be angled away from the surgical field, so can use whatever the circuit you want lighter circuit, closed circuit, or Bain circuit, whatever maybe, can comfortably use with this tube. But the disadvantage is being a forceps or stilet is needed to intubate because very pliable, flexible. So without stilet intubating either orally and nasally, it will be much more difficult to traumatize. And the elastic recoil force may increase the tendency to unintentional extubation. So it should be always careful in fixing the fluxometallic tubes. And the absence of a Murphy eye may result in obstruction. Usually nowadays it's come, in the initial days it came without Murphy's eye, but nowadays fluxometallics are coming with Murphy's eye. Next, moving on to, can anyone say? Looks like our Murphy's tube, but can see that it is a quite big, longer, lengthier tube from the cuff to the patient end, machine end. This is a microlaryngeal tube. So available with size of 4, 5, and 6 internal diameter, and they have a high volume and low pressure cuff. And cuff diameter are the same as the 8 mm tube, and some tubes nowadays coming with the yellow colored tube to demarcate as a microlaryngeal tube. Advantage of microlaryngeal surgery, and the small tube diameter provides better visibility during intubation and onto the surgical field by the ENT surgeons during vocal cord or subglottic area surgeries. And its length allows it to be used for nasal intubation and even intubation via an LMA. So that's the advantage of this. The disadvantages of this laryngeal tube: narrow diameter may lead to resistance to exhalation. So you should make sure that, and not safe for use with lasers. And due to the flexibility, they can be difficult to insert without a measuring force. Coming on to double lumen tube. As you all see, double lumen tube. Just by looking at that, experts, PGs now be thorough enough what tube I can have. There are, by historical thing, we have Carlin's tube with a carinal hook. Usually, in old museum, you can see with same tube with the carinal hook. Carlin's tube for the left-sided tube, and the White's tube for the right-sided with the same carinal hook. But both the tubes are not in use now. Carlin's and White's, don't worry. And Robert Shaw made up red rubber, that is also not used. The next comes your bronchocath, Mallinckrodt, and this is the tube. You can see that I'm having I maybe mirror from there, but this is the right-sided Mallinckrodt bronchocath double lumen tube. Okay, the sizes, you all know that we have from 35 to 41. 35. This sizes of double lumen tube is not based on age or weight of the patient, based on the height of the patient. Because depth of insertion, the fixation should be done precise. So based on the height of the patient, for females less than 160 centimeter, 35 size. Females above 160, it is 37 French, and males above 170, it is 41, and less is 39. So we have 35, 37 female, 39, 41 for males. And coming on to the parts, we have two curves. See, is the anterior curve to fit the oropharyngeal and the laryngotracheal curvature, and the second curve, you can see second curve, the bronchial curve, to the right or to the left, depending on the bronchus where you want to intubate for the particular case. And we have a longer bronchial lumen. You can see the side view, longer bronchial lumen, and tracheal lumen ends here. Tracheal lumen ends here, bronchial lumen ends distally. Shorter tracheal lumen with the cuff, tracheal cuff will be in white, bronchial cuff will be in blue color coded. The same way, the circuit adapters in the connectors will be with the similar white for tracheal and the thing for bronchial as labeled clear. The preformed curve to facilitate entry to the bronchus, but for intubation we need a malleable stillet, and we also have a radiopaque marker on the entire length of the tube. And the insertion technique I'm not to tell in detail, you can go through in your concerned textbooks. And advantages: easier to position, can be positioned without bronchoscopy if you are good, well-versed, skilled. And for initial phases, you need a fiber optic, but always better that you confirm your double lumen position by a fiber optic. Less time is required to position when compared to the bronchial blockers, and more rapid lung collapse is achieved. Legs likely to be displaced, allows either lung to be ventilated, collapse, or re-expanded. Each lung can be suctioned adequately. and each lung can be inspected with a bronchoscope. CPAP also can be easily applied to the operated lung and enables independent lung ventilation in the critical care areas. But the disadvantages, it cannot be inserted for a difficult airway patient because quite bigger in size, will traumatize. So should be cautious. And the large size and design of double lumen can cause airway damage. Should be very meticulous during your insertion. Should be cautious and careful. Should have a good planning of your size, selection of patients, everything. And lesions within the trachea like tumors or relative contraindications to double lumen replacement. And sometimes at the end of surgery, or anesthetist, you can choose any on-table extubation or in the ICU. So before extubation, we will change the DLD to a conventional single lumen 82. So that time you should be cautious and careful. And indications are all you know that lung isolation techniques, patients with bronchiectasis, the lung abscess, and surgeries, major bronchopleural or bronchoesophageal fistula, then major bronchial disruption or trauma, unilateral lung lavage for primary pulmonary proteinosis, and video assisted thoracoscopic procedures. You can use this, and open thoracotomy also. So that's all about tubes. Fine. Next, we'll move on to supraglottic airways, or SGAs. There is a pool of SGAs nowadays available in market. Remember, I'm just going to highlight some 5 to 6 commonly used supraglottic airways. First and foremost is classic LME. The first generation LME is fixed outside the trachea. Hands-free means achieving a gas-tight airway. We have a vertical base, prevents the tube being obstructed by the epiglottis here. The parts being the distal tip, which occupies the floor of hypopharynx or the upper esophageal sphincter, the side of the cuff, which occupies the piriform fossa, and the upper part of the cuff is the airway tube, an adapter, and the inflation system. Standard size, 3, 4 for the size, and 5. We have various sizes. There are 7 sizes of thing. It can be advantage being you can use for short duration surgeries. You can have both spontaneous ventilation using a good inhalational for the maintenance of anesthesia for the IV and inhalation rule, and you can also use for controlled ventilation for short duration surgeries. So advantages have an increased airway seal, decreased chance of aspiration, but still being a disadvantage that it's not a full protective airway regarding aspiration. So that's a disadvantage. And contraindicated in intraoral surgery, you can't use it. And sometimes cuff holding can create airway obstruction, and less suitable as an intubating device. And sizes also, you all know that from 1 to 1, 1.5 to 2.5 till 6. Just to remember that size 1 for neonates up to 5 kg, cuff volume of 4 ml, with size 3.5. You can tracheal tube, you can use 3.5, and 2 size for 10 to 20 kg patients, cuff volume of 10 ml, 3 size 30 to 50 kg patients with cuff volume of 20 ml, and 4 size 50 to 70 kg for cuff volume of 30 ml. So next comes our ProSeal LME. As you all know that this is our ProSeal LME. We have 2 tubes here, airway tube and the gastric tube. Parts, we have the cuff inflation line with the pilot balloon, inflation system, airway tube, and the gastric access, the gastric port. It's made from both silicone and latex free. Available in 6 sizes as usual, 4 from female and 5 from male. The thing is, it has an additional dorsal cuff, which pushes the mask anteriorly to provide a better seal. Okay, additional dorsal cuff. So we have a better seal here. So advantage, ease of insertion, smooth awakening you can have, and low operating room pollution, and protection against barotrauma. Can be used again for both spontaneous and controlled ventilation. Easier to place even for a difficult airway patients. But the disadvantages being it requires greater depth of anesthesia. We need a good plane, induce the patient comfortably with a good plane, then only can introduce this LME. Again, otherwise you have a reflux, either patients either severe coughing or any partial airway obstruction. So short, but the disadvantage being a shorter lifespan. It cannot be used like classical LME for so many times articulated or multiple reuse times. So lifespan is shorter. and still airway trauma is there if it doesn't use your proper Chandis maneuver, other insertion technique to introduce your LMA properly, and dislodgement and very rarely bronchospasm also possible. Should be cautious. Coming on to next, LMA Supreme. LMA Supreme. Okay, fine. This is second generation LMA, latex free, usually disposable, single use. And here the tube part is rigid. You can see it's rigid, pre-shaped to adapt to the contour of our airway anatomy, and built-in bite block. You can see that this is when patient or the extubation time. So damage of LMA can be avoided. So nowadays all LMAs are provided with integral bite block, and there are 2 ports. You can see that 2 ports. See that? So this is the airway port and this is the gastric port. Okay, drain tube or train tube port. We have cuff molded fins inside. See that? To prevent epiglottis from obstructing the airway, and can ventilate with pressures up even up to 35 centimeters of water. So and available in both adult and pediatrics. Next, move on to our iGel. You can see that iGel. This is second generation supraglottic airway. It's soft. You can see that soft gel-like and cuffless. You can see there is no cuff. It's made of fully no cuff. Okay, cuffless, soft gel, cuffless supraglottic airway made of thermoplastic elastomer. As you know, the hygroscopic. By the airway secretion of the patient, it tends to swell and forms a airtight seal slowly. It creates non-inflatable anatomical seal of the pharyngeal, first pharyngeal, then your laryngeal, then perilaryngeal structures. Completely, slowly seal entire area. Avoids compression trauma that can occur with inflatable supraglottic airway device. Tip of the distal non-inflatable cuff lies in the proximal opening of the esophagus. The proximal end of the cuff epiglottis rests with the ridge. You can see here. And as an elliptical buccal cavity stabilizer, and as a circular lumen and a lumen for a gastric port insertion. I think you can see, and not in the white background. Okay, you have a gastric port option. Then has an integral bite block, as you know that. The advantage being provides minimal risk of tissue compression, latex free, single patient disposable use. Then next comes this is Buska mask. Buska mask being the parts of the Buska mask being the same thing, bite block, your attachment for suction. This is the attachment for suction, and this other opening you have 3 openings, airway 2 other openings here, and one for leave it to atmosphere. Here you can attach it to suction, and this is your insertion tab. You can see that this is your insertion tab and your advanced airway opening. You can see the parts here, both in the lateral view I will show, on the anterior view. Inferior also you can have a look. I would have been seen this, nothing, just a revision. So this is about the parts, and it's obviously it's the 3rd generation supraglottic airway. Easy insertion, seal increases with the passive pressure ventilation. No inflatable, no cuff system here. As in iGel, no cuff system here. No inflated balloon, and expandable membranous cuff producing effective seal. It's designed like that. It gives an effective seal, and advanced gastric reflex overflow protection. As I told you, it gives a double gastric channel. Nothing. The bigger particles can be suctioned out, and the smaller secretions can be suctioned with your smaller nasogastric tube with that. Okay. So, but during the extubation, should be cautious with this device. Okay. So that's all about Buska mask. We'll move on to intubating LMA. Next comes your intubating LMA, the complete set, as you know that, and it's a modification of fast track of the C-track LMA. So here a rigid structure is there, rigid structure made of stainless steel, anatomically curved to fit into the contour of the face, airway anatomy, and short whiteboard airway tube. Okay, short whiteboard airway tube that follows the anatomical curvature of the palate and the postpharyngeal wall, both. So we have an integrated guiding handle of the stabilizer rod and an epiglottic. You can see that epiglottis, elevator bar of the mask aperture, and a guiding ramp also. We have three sizes: size 3, 4, 5. Size 3 for 30 to 50 kg patients, in which you can introduce a 7 mm tube, and 50 to 70 kg patients, you have to choose a 4 size. You can go for the 7.5 tube intubation, and 70 to 100 kg patients, you can take the size 5 with a 40 ml air volume insertion. You can choose 8 mm tube. Okay. So advantages, we have advantages of intubating LME. It can be used in can't intubate, can't ventilate scenarios. Allows fast insertion into the correct position without moving patient's head or neck. No need to. So it can be neutral position. You can intubate. Used for difficult airway management many times. Can be used alone or as a guide for intubation for intubating user 82 as a guide. And good conduit for a fiber optic intubation in the presence of a blood or clot in the airway. You can use this put and first intubating LMA, use a fiber optic in the channel, and you can assess your airway anatomy. Then facilitates ventilation between your intubating LMA insertion and the endotracheal tube insertion. Disadvantage, more likely to dislodge, not suitable for MRI as is as a metal portion, and difficult in insertion because of limited mouth opening. Because so limited mouth opening patients, you can't use intubating LME. So that's all about intubating LME. The last thing, you can go for COMBI2. So you see that nicely. It's a COMBI2. It's a esophageal tracheal double lumen airways. Called other name is esophageal tracheal double lumen airways. Single use, nothing. It's used by non-anesthesia personnel, medicos, commonly used by paramedics. You can intubate, whether goes into esophagus, go into trachea. You can inflate accordingly. Check with your double connectors one by one and intubate and ventilate. Ventilate the patient and stay on an emergency purpose. So the differ from other supraglottic airway devices that it provides an airway after blind placement. As I told you, we have parts here, 2 lumens. The pharyngeal lumen without occluded. The pharyngeal lumen become occluded distal end, and we have a tracheal lumen without the patent tracheal lumen. Okay, with a distal patent distal end with a clear tube. Okay, this is clear. And we have 2 cuffs here. The pharyngeal cuff, bigger one is pharyngeal cuff. It seals your pharyngeal inlet. And if you intubate into esophagus, you can inflate the tracheal cuff or the distal cuff. The volume of the pharyngeal cuff is 85 to 100 ml, 85 ml for the pediatric size, 100 ml for the adult size. And the tracheal cuff volume is 5 to 15 ml. You can inflate. Accidentally got into the, usually esophagus being a wider open, it will go into the esophagus blindly. So inflate the pharyngeal cuff primarily, inflate your distal cuff. Now you will able to ventilate your trachea through your ventilation slots. That's the eyes. We call it as ventilation eyes or 8. We see that clear. 4 here and 4 opposite. You can see in the lateral view. 4 here, 4. So this 8 oval-shaped ventilation slots or the eyes perforation between the 2 cuffs. Okay, so you can ventilate now. And the smaller distal cuff serves to seal the either esophagus trachea as based on its placement. You can, if you luckily gone into trachea, you can inflate this. You can confirm with capnography or by your gas tracing on the tube clinically by auscultation. Then you can proceed only with the tracheal cuff inflation. And the sizes, as I told, we have there are commonly available 3 sizes: 26 for pediatric, 37 and 41 for adult male and female. So indications, as I told, difficult airway management, patient with limited mouth opening, patient with excessive pharyngeal bleeding, hematoma causing upper airway obstruction, and patient with facial bones. Advantages, as I told, emergency airway management, you can do it. Shorter time is needed, less skill is enough. Commonly used by non-anesthesia personnel, medicos, surgeons usually, and often by paramedics also. They can use it, can teach them, and provides good, but not complete protection against aspiration. Somehow it will protect, but it's not completely protected because if you got into esophagus and inflate that, your entire aspiration content cannot be prevented. This so, like by paratubal cuff leak, it will tend to content entering into a trachea more gravely. Disadvantages: bit expensive, trauma associated with insertion. If you're not smart enough, it will traumatize the airway, and there sometimes bit confusion between the two cuffs by paramedics to teach them clearly. And tracheal suctioning and FOB is not possible. So disadvantage with this combi 2. That's all about tubes. I think my time now is. We'll move to regional. Okay, I'll make it fast now. We'll move to regional now. I think I have a vertebra first. One of my favorite area, vertebra. We have an anterior element and a posterior element. Anterior element being the vertebral body, posterior element formed by vertebral arch, spinous process, lamina, pedicula. I'll tell you one by one. And the vertebral column is formed by your vertebra, intervertebral disc, and anterior and posterior longicular ligament, and which provides your intervertebral disc provides flexibility and good shock absorber with the nucleus pulposus. And the difference about I can show you. I have two right now. I doesn't have one more hand to show the thoracic. I have only lumbar, and this is cervical. You can see the dens. So this is C2 axis and a lumbar vertebra. Okay. And the difference, just brief salient features, don't worry about that, will be kept in the exam. You just know the salient difference among features among cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebra. Cervical, the body will be, I'll first show the cervical. You should know the spinous, simple. Remember the spinous process is bifid. So that should be posterior. That's all. So this is your anterior view. From my, I am taking the anterior view into your screen front. The body, small, oval, and curved faces, and whereas it will be in thoracic, medium, heart-shaped, flat faces. Okay, with the rib places for rib articulation. Whereas in lumbar, you can see that massive, oval, and flat faces. You can easily identify. And the vertebral foramen, you can see that in the cervical, you can nicely see the foramen in the transverse process. I mean, vertebral foramen being this one. As far as I'll say the next vertebral foramen here. Sorry, this one. You can see the vertebral foramen will be bigger in cervical. Gradually it will come because as spinal cord tapers out, it will become vertebral foramen become smaller in lumbar. Okay, you can see that. And coming on to transverse process, the transverse foramina, the nerve roots, you can see that will be present in the cervical vertebra. Okay, you can see that now. This is transverse foramina. And there will be absent in lumbar. In the thoracic, all have, but T1 and T11 and T12 have phases for rib articulations. Okay, the functions, as you all know, that the cervical, it supports the skull, stabilizes relative positions of brain and spinal cord, and allow control head movement. And thoracic support weight of for head and neck, upper limbs, and chest articulate the ribs to allow changes in the volume of thoracic cage. And the lumbar support the weight of the head and neck and upper lips, the entire trunk. That's why its body should be bigger. And remember that something called typical and atypical vertebrae. Remember that there are 9 atypical vertebrae among the entire vertebral column from cervical to coccyx. Remember there are 9 atypical vertebrae. Rest of the all other things are typical. The atypical here is, remember that the regions occurring, the transitioning regions of the vertebral column, like junction of skull and with both bone with your cervical area. The C1 and C2 come atypical like this. As I told you, you have a dense atlas and axis, different feature. And the C7 vertebra prominence, you know that, and T1. Okay, C1, C2, C7, T1. There's 4 there in the neck area. Remember. Next, lower thorax, come to lower thoracic, T9, T10, T11, T12. So the last 4 lower thoracic. Then the L5, going to with lumbosacral. So L5. Okay. So these are the 9 atypical vertebrae. Rest are the typical vertebrae. Clinical significance. Why means needle distinction of needle insertion and advancement in thoracic versus lumbar levels. You should know that because the spinous process lumbar is posterior and straight. You can directly have your epidural or spinal horizontal or minimal oblique. Whereas in transverse, this is cervical, transverse thoracic vertebra should go a bit oblique to reach your desired area. Then coming on to spinal needles, as you know that we have different sizes, not to bore about that. I'll be saying about the salient features. Uh, this is the standard, also a bread and butter of a daily practice. Kunkke's Babcock's spinal needle, standard spinal needle of a small hub, sharp point with a medium length cutting bevel. Here, I think I can have the picture later. With a fitted stillet with a matching bevel tip to cannula point and connector. The lumen size, we have sizes where, as you know, that from 16 gauge till 27 gauge and the latest also. And the difference between these, I have a printout here. I think just to show that you can read. I mean, mirror image will have nothing. Kunkke's Whitaker and the Sprout needle that you can go through in a textbook. So Whitaker pencil point needle, no cutting edges, separate the fibers that all can read in your books and get 12 hours. So don't think that Kunkke's, they'll keep sometime pencil point also in the exams. Be thorough with that. Move on to next. We'll go the epidural needle and the epidural catheter. I don't want to waste a catheter, just with the needle. We have the commonly used name is Tuhai needle. We have modified Tuhai needle and the V's epidural needle for a stable grip, with the wings for a stable grip. Okay. And the length, you should know that 10 centimeter with 1 centimeter in graduation they have. And the tip is called, what is the tip of this epidural needle is called? Huber's point. You can see that now. The preformed tip, Huber's point or Huber's tip. Sizes, you know that adult 16, 18 gauge, pediatrics 19 gauge. The pediatric epidural, you should know. This is the adult 10 centimeter. The pediatric epidural needle is totally be 5 centimeter length. That's all. It will be 5 centimeter length with the 0.5 centimeter marking. It will have 0.5 centimeter marking. And the catheter, know that it's made of nylon or polyvinyl chloride. It's a radio opaque, length of 90 to 100 centimeter. And catheter sizes from 16 to 20 gauge we have. Then move on to next advantage and disadvantage. Again, you can read, not to go here. We'll move on to time now. Okay. We'll move on to miscellaneous. I'll be showing about CVP catheter, then Swan-Ganz catheter, neuromuscular monitor, then cuff pressure monitor. That's all, no? Fine. That's all the last four. CVP catheter, as you all know that, you should be thorough about that CVP catheter. So, as you all know that indications, contraindications, you all read in the book. And typically, they have 15 to 30 centimeter. We have different sizes and length. Now, multiple lumen catheters are preferred. We have single lumen, double lumen, triple lumen. In the exam, you should say that this is a triple lumen central venous pressure monitoring device or catheter. Like that, you should start. Okay. Then you can tell about your parts and the sizes. The commonly used sizes, 7 French. Multi-lumen catheters are favored in ICUs because patients need multitude of parenteral therapies for inotropic supports, fluids, nutrition, parenteral nutrition, TP, and so on. So triple lumen catheters, multi-lumen catheters are preferred. And two things you should remember about catheter-related infections and catheter-related thrombosis. So, and also you should know about Hagen-Poiseuille equation, because when compared to 16 gauge and 18 gauge catheters, with much longer length of central venous catheters. So, as predicted by Hagen-Poiseuille equation, you should be thorough about that, choosing the length and the your planning of your catheter tip. And remember that there are 4 steps before your central venous catheter insertion, either by anatomical technique or your USG guided, and either by landmark. You can anatomy and all you read by yourself. You can go through that anterior approach, low anterior approach, posterior approach. So I'm not going to talk about that here. 4 steps that always get written informed consent for a CVP catheter, because this is also a procedure. You can end up meticulously sometimes having a hematoma, thrombosis, or a arrhythmia. So you should have an official with written informed consent before your procedure. And a strict asepsis, you should do the procedure, and you should always do the procedure and strict ECG monitoring. Without ECG monitoring, because the tip, the guide wire, you have to thread forward and take it back withdraw the guide wire, so it can injure your SA node or atrial valve. So arrhythmias, you should be always cautious during the procedure. So strictly under ECG monitoring, and always do a post procedure check X-ray to know the exact placement of a catheter, neither too much in, not too much out in the correct place. Sometimes we migrate into the, we'll put it to right IJV, we'll go to the subclavian. Okay, should be cautious in your post-procedure check itself. And nowadays coming with antimicrobial catheters coating like chlorhexidine, sulfasalfadicin, and sometimes minocycline, rampicin. So many antibiotics covered catheters are coming. So we can know about those also. We move on to Swan-Ganz catheter. This is a Swan-Ganz catheter. Don't worry about that. Many of the students, after seeing this, they want to push this away from the table. Okay, nothing like that. You can, I say that you can take that very well in the first choice, in the examiner gives choice to you. Nothing nowadays become only used in catheteristic anesthesia, high critical surgeries, or any critical patients, or any prolonged indications. I'll say you later, but not much of use nowadays. Only consultants or the case load is where there is more. There only you can see this Swan-Ganz catheter placing during procedure. Okay, otherwise you can see only theoretically nowadays. And you can see that this is a flexible flow directed balloon tip catheter, say various sizes from 60 to 110 centimeter length, 4 to 7.5 French sizes we can have, and material is made of PVC. The standard catheter is 110 centimeter long, this length, entire length, and marked every 10 centimeter once by a marking. Okay, then we have 5 lumens here. This is a 5 lumen one. The lumen 1, distal lumen, it will be marked here. Okay, don't worry about that. We can know once you use that one, you can see distal lumen is for measuring pulmonary artery pressure, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, and sample withdrawal for mixed venous oxygen saturation, and also can use for drug administration. Then the proximal infusion lumen, okay, and it terminates 30 centimeter proximal to the every two terminates at different end of the Swan-Ganz catheter. Okay, so we can use for infusions, CVP monitoring, and blood sampling. And the proximal injectate lumen, this is that. Okay, proximal injectate lumen, it terminates at 26 centimeter from the distal tip for RA pressure monitoring and blood sampling also. Next comes your balloon inflation lumen, terminates with the balloon located just proximal to the catheter tip. You can see that, and will be always come with a pre-filled syringe. Okay, just 1 to 1.5 ml pre-filled air. That's the thing to your to wedge your pulmonary capillary. So that is a desired volume. So you can't inject more than that. Should not damage that. So always comes with a pre-filled sterile syringe with the complete set. Now it is not here. And next comes your thermistor connector lumen, and you can have a upper side lumen. You can have additional. You can see the 5 lumens. All of it to be clear, 5 lumens. In addition to that, we have 2 more lumen for oximeter lumen and additional venous infusion lumen. A procedure I'm not going to say here. And indications, as I told you, perioperative cardiac surgery patients, critically ill patients on inotropes, surgeries requiring critical fluid resuscitation, complicated myocardial infarction, and cardiogenic shock, non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema, and septic shock. Contraindications, as you know that the procedure, again it's strict monitoring only, the same concern, everything is a bit complicated than the CVP. So only the experienced anesthetists usually do that. So make sure that contraindications for tricuspid and pulmonary stenosis, it's contraindicated. For RA or pulmonary artery masses, you should not do it. And tetralogy of Fallot, the right output tract being hypersensitive, it may induce infundibulous spasm, so you should not do a PA catheter for those patients, and it can induce arrhythmias, coagulopathy, complete left bundle branch block, Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, and Epstein's malformation are the contraindication. And the last two, video laryngoscope and the cuff pressure monitor. Video laryngoscope. Hello, madam, shall I take more time now? What's the time now? 7:25. Okay. I think 10 minutes more. I'll try to finish. So next comes our video laryngoscope. This is a basic version. We have lot many now, from a simple version to a King Vision. So many video laryngoscope there. I'm just the basic model. I'm saying that equipment consists of a LCD monitor. I switch it on. LCD monitor and connecting cable or with the battery backup. Blades of various sizes. Okay, and intubating still there, and sometimes disposable laryngoscope blades also. indications and switch it on. Indications, that anticipated difficult airway, awake intubation, you can try sometime with the topical airway anesthesia. For rapid sequence intubation and unanticipated failed laryngoscope, you can take next use the laryngoscope and combined use of guide scope with fiber optic bronchoscope in difficult airway. And sometime in diagnostic modality to document the recurrent laryngeal nerve status after next surgeries like thyroid surgeries. Extubation, you can have a vocal cord status using a video laryngoscope and you can very well document. You can show to your surgery. That's advantage nowadays. And placement of esophageal echo probes and direct vision and placement of double lumen tubes for thoracic surgery also you can use. And emergency ER department airway management can be used even for trismus and uncooperative patients. Airway management for patients with inline neck stabilization, cervical trauma patients, and ICU application even for tube exchange you can use this, and pediatric airway management. And the advantages, as I told you, better efficacy in the patients with predicted difficult tracheal intubation, shown to improve endotracheal intubation in infants also, improved success rate in intubating others with normal airway and difficult airway. Disadvantages, as I told that sometime usually in the beginners enthusiastically go directly into the epiglottis, will have only esophageal view. That's a common mistake. So that should not be done. So you can learn meticulously and always look at the screen. Possibility of tissue damage is there meticulously, and fogging of the video lens. Sometimes fogging of the lens will occur here, so that your vision will not be clearly seen. That they say that prior 20 seconds warm up is needed to defog the lens. Should be turned on for 10 seconds prior to be. As I told you, proper training is needed. So that's a thing. And coming on to fiber optic laryngoscope, I'm not going to show here. You can read and all those things that can also be kept in the exams. Don't think that they won't bring fiber optic and that cannot be kept up. If so many airway equipments nowadays has come, so whatever available in the each institute, they can keep that also. And the last one being peripheral nerve stimulator, I'm not going to teach that also, but this can also be kept in our exam. Peripheral nerve stimulator and nerve locators that also be kept. And your simple cuff pressure monitor that also can be kept in the exam. You can see that the green range ideal for endotracheal tube cuff pressure and this gray for LMA. So see that it is 20 to 30 centimeter of water for your ET tube and 50 to 60 centimeters of water for LMA. Okay, the parts are Linley's valve hook for fixing it, Leuer connection, and the vacuum valve to inflate and deflate to maintain the ideal cuff pressure. And few self studies which I cannot show the device here, which I cannot shown here, but you have to read for exams. Like airway adjuncts, we have Goodell's oropharyngeal airway, nasopharyngeal airway, Stillett, Bougie, airway exchange catheter, one, all type of laryngoscopes, including Macintosh, Miller, and McCoy blades. All blades, whatever you should have, everything they can keep in the exam, and even pediatric different face mask, Renderbreaker mask, normal silicon mask, centered mask, anatomical face mask, all simpler devices can pick up. And the difficult airway cord, which I have not shown here, is cricothyrotomy device, percutaneous tracheostomy kit, retrograde intubation kit, and tracheostomy tubes also we can kept in the exams. So just go through that. And finally, vaporizers. Vaporizers can be kept in both machine station. Sometimes they'll detach your vaporizer, alethane, CO, or ISO, whatever thing. They'll keep at your instrument station also. They can ask questions on vaporizers in your equipment station. So maximum I've covered for the exam point of view. So I hope over to Ranjan sir and Nagalakshmi ma'am.
Suresh, can you hear me, Suresh?
Yeah, I'm able to.
Thank you so much. If it was a live audio, everything, you would have heard some thundering applause for the effort you took when you got all the instruments to your place and you showed it such a in a clean way it will be definitely useful to the students. Uh, I know many would have used it, but how to answer these things in exam? You gave them a good, nice points. I knew that you wanted to do fiber optic and others things.
Yes.
I told not to do it because yeah, because of the time constraints, and the instrument is little big and big one to show it to others. It will be difficult. That is why we tried to avoid it. Otherwise, for the students, he wanted to do it. He wanted to cover as many as possible, but we thought these are the ones which are very important to be covered for the exams. 5 to 10 minutes will be there for the instrument identification and a few points about the instruments. All those things Suresh covered beautifully. Thank you so much, Suresh.